People who have been clinically dead, what did you experience? Story 1. I was dead for 6 minutes. I was laying on the gurney, and I was getting colder. Somewhere my body started warming up, and everything became really calm and peaceful. I was not longer in pain. All the noise from ER just went away. It was really enjoyable. I was thinking about my daughter, and I was remembering all the things we had done. Slowly it was just black and nothing. There was no knowledge of anything. I explain it as it was like before I was born. Then the worst thing in the world is being revived. I started hearing loud noises. I felt this massive pain. Then there was the nastiest stench ever. The smell was like every dead animal had crawled in my nose. The smell was so bad I started vomiting. I remember the DRs turning me on my side and watching my vomit spray on a nurse. Dying was the most pleasant thing I have ever experienced, and being revived the worst. Story 2. Not really sure what happened, and it still freaks me out to this day. My daughter was 4 and developed pneumonia. Her breathing would stop in her sleep, so we took her into the emergency room. She was there for a total of 5 days. For the first 3 days her health kept deteriorating. And on the 3rd day my girlfriend got a call that her mother had collapsed and was taken to the hospital. She was without oxygen for 20 minutes and was declared brain dead. That night my daughter woke up and asked about Grandma. No one had said anything to her or in the room with her. We asked her what did she mean. She told us that Grandma came to her in a dream and said it's not your time yet. I'll go for you. Immediately the next day, she was almost 100% better. Story 3. Anaphylaxis, wasn't breathing. I considered all the hallucinations I experienced likely due to hypoxic episode until I told my mom what I saw. A middle-aged man who wasn't in scrubs standing still at the end of my bed while all staff were running around and doing their business. I was having a nonverbal conversation with him, and he was telling me to calm down, focus on breathing. He wore a tropical-style button-down shirt, one of those old-school newsboys' hats, and had a very pleasant demeanor. Mom showed me a photo of my grandpa that I never had seen before, and it was the guy at the foot of my bed, and he died before I was even born. Story 4. My girlfriend is anaphylactic, and it is triggered by a chemical called salicylate, found in pretty much every food. When she was in high school, she had her first big reaction, and the school nurses refused to administer her EpiPen, adrenaline shot, until the ambulance got there. Now obviously, having an anaphylactic reaction doesn't give you a lot of waiting time, so by the time the ambulance got to her school, she was in pretty bad shape and barely conscious. The paramedics immediately administered one of her EpiPens, called the nurses fucking twats, and loaded her into the ambulance as her mother arrived. She continued to fade, so they gave her a direct injection of adrenaline this time, still nothing. They give her a second direct injection of adrenaline, and this time it hits her about 30 seconds later all at once, and her heart fails. She stops breathing, no pulse, nothing. Dead to the world. For about 2 minutes and 46 seconds she was clinically dead. And the scariest thing is, she saw nothing. She tells me that when you are losing consciousness, you can't tell the difference between waves of drowsiness and when your body actually shuts down. All she saw was the darkness of her eyelids, and it felt like going into an extremely calm sleep where she couldn't hear or feel anything, and she didn't mind it. All despite the fact her mother and the paramedics were screaming at her to keep her eyes open, and the ambulance was flying towards the hospital. She miraculously just came back to life almost 3 minutes later as they were giving her chest compressions, and the cardiologist that assessed her later stated that all the adrenaline in her body was enough to not only stop her heart, but to also restart it with a little help from the paramedic pumping it around. But still to this day, she can't differentiate falling asleep after a long day and dying. Story 5. This reminded me of the lady in the office when I was first grade. I had asthma as a child. Very thankfully I outgrew it, but at 7 it was still really rough. To keep kids from losing their inhalers or medications we were supposed to take during school hours, we had to go to the office to get our dose. Even at 7 that made no sense to me, considering that, while yes, I was supposed to use my inhaler at certain times, it was also supposed to be on my person in case of an asthma attack. One day, the worst happened and I started having an asthma attack in THR classroom. The teacher aide hauled ASS to the office to get my inhaler, only to be told by the office woman that it's not time for her to use it yet. She just needs to take a deep breath. I don't remember much, but the story I was told is the aide threatened to beat the woman's ass if she didn't get out my inhaler, and told her it would be on her if I died, because she was refusing to give me my medication. She ended up handing it over, and the aide ran back to me. It took a few tries to get my breathing back to normal, and I guess I was getting blue. The teacher had called my mom as soon as they had me breathing again, and she and the aide told my mom what happened once she got there and was holding me. My mom picked me up, asked the aide to walk with her to the office and point out which lady it was. Again, this is just what I was told happened because I was young and don't remember for myself. I guess my mom had me sit on the little waiting area couch where I usually sat when waiting for my after lunch puffs of my inhaler. Mom could be heard screaming at the bitch in the office through the entire front hallway. The aide had sat with me to make sure I would still be okay while Mom went into the office. I have no memory of what was said, but I know my parents went back and had a discussion with the superintendent a day or so later. Not sure if that lady got fired or not, but I know she was never the one giving me my inhaler at lunchtime after that. Story 6. My wife and I discussed this at length. For years ago, she died twice in 3 months, needing full resuscitation both times. Both were lengthy rescues. One resuscitation was off and on for nearly 40 minutes. I asked her later when she had recovered if she remembered anything at all during the times she was clinically dead. She remembered nothing. Blackness. No light. No relatives and former pets waiting for her. Just black. Thankfully also no pain. She finally passed 18 months ago, and I hope she felt no pain or worry the final time. It started with 2 spontaneous brain bleeds. Technically, it started with her having lupus. The first brain bleed led to her passing, but they did a craniotomy, revived her, then a re-bleed. The trauma from all that caused her lupus to set fire, which led to complete kidney failure and another cardiac arrest, passing and recovery, which led to 2 strokes. She recovered enough to be home and mostly independent, but having to go to dialysis 3 times a week for 3 years. She passed the final test to get on the kidney transplant list on Wednesday and had a massive cardiac/respiratory event at dialysis on Friday where she passed again, but was kept alive on life support. I waited a week hoping for recovery, but we disconnected life support per her wishes, a topic we had talked about many times. Story 7. I know 3 people that have been clinically dead and have come back. What they described is something much different than what people are talking about here. They all said, if you paraphrase, that it feels as if you're passing out. Someone compared it to ODing on whippets, nitrous oxide, a feeling of your conscience slowly getting focused into one point in the exact middle of your head, while your limbs lose feeling in a tingling, pleasant way, and then you lose consciousness. One girl said that when she came back into conscience, she was hallucinating because she had no idea what was going on, and that she started dreaming of something safe. I'd her mother hugging her in a warm bed. Story 8. I'm going to have to speak for my dad here. He passed away a few years back. I wrote this out while back actually, but maybe this will be a relevant place for it to be also. Dad was fearful in his last days. He had been to the hospital many times, and every single time he came close to death, what he remembered didn't reconcile with what most people report when having a near-death experience. He in fact had a lot of bad experiences. One in particular where he relived a day 3 times in a row where doctors sedated him, but he was still fully aware of what was happening to him. He could hear the conversations, feel the pain, feel the choking and suffocation. When I saw him the next day, he had tears in his eyes as he tried to communicate a question on how many days he was out. When I told him one day, he was confused, and it took him a while to wrap his head around it. He thought he went to hell, and this was his eternal punishment. He pondered for a long time on what he could have done to deserve that as a punishment. He did not ever want to be in the hospital. He hated them his whole life, and that experience made him hate hospitals even more. Dad's last trip via ambulance, he actually walked out to the ambulance, and it wasn't because of the usual shortness of breath. It was because of chest pains. I was sure this was going to be a short stay, and he'd be back soon. During his last stay, he experienced more sedation, more hallucinations, and more disorientation. I went to visit him every single day to get an update on his status. One night in particular, they had trouble getting his heart rate down. It was steadily beating at about 160, and would calm to 120 or so before going back up to 160. It wasn't good for him. Then the next time he was up, I walked in right around his dinner time. He couldn't wait to talk to me, but he could barely talk. It took all of his effort and energy, but he had some things to say. Dad, son, I know without a doubt that there is an afterlife. Me really? Dad nods. Me, how are you so sure? You've been seeing guns on the ceiling, and all kinds of hallucinations. Dad, That wasn't me, I wasn't here. Me, you weren't here? Dad, I was there. Me, okay, well. Did you see anyone you knew? Dad, shaking his head, no, it's not like that. You can see souls being born into life, and it's the most beautiful thing you can see. Everyone has their own color, and they're trying to get to white. Me, trying to get to white? Dad, nods yes, time doesn't exist there. Time is here because of us, and we're here because of time. Oh, I should have done more. Looks at his hands, I could have been another Jimmy Page. He's referring to his skill as a guitarist. I could have done more. Me, but you were the greatest, Dad, and... Dad, smirking a little to indicate that isn't what he meant, do more. Do everything you can. Me, so like carpe diem? Like seize the day. Dad, brightens yes. Do everything you can. Don't worry about the consequences. Everyone finds their way. People worry too much about the consequences. Just do good and do as much as you can. Everyone eventually gets there. Tell the family. Me, can I tell everyone? Dad, yes, tell everyone. Me, okay, Dad. I'll tell everybody. Dad, nods in agreement. I can tell he's tired by this time. Me, I love you, Dad. Dad, I love you too, son. This was the last conversation that I had with him. I miss him terribly and have been trying real hard to find myself again after his passing. It's been a long time, and I've been able to cope with it enough to finally write this all out. I hope this finds someone that needs to hear it. With love. Story 9. I was on loads of morphine, so it's still really hazy, and the fact it happened almost 6 years ago doesn't help the memory, but I'll try to recollect, as accurately I can, what happened and what I experienced. I had appendicitis, and my foster parents at the time didn't take me to the hospital until almost 3 days after it had burst. I should have been dead well before they took me. Even the doctors called it a miracle. Well, I died while waiting for surgery. I had to wait for a pediatric surgeon to come in, because no one else felt comfortable performing the surgery on a case this bad with a child this size. Dumbass took me to the adult hospital, not the pediatrics, which was 40 minutes away. I was 14, 5 feet 3 inches, and weighed 75 pounds soaking wet. So while I was waiting for the surgeon, I was in a room with me, the doctor, my 2 foster parents, and my grandmother, who was an RN. Like I said, I was really drugged up and couldn't really focus on much and couldn't really do anything. The monitor I was hooked up to would beep really loudly from time to time, and the intervals between beeps started to decrease rapidly. Turns out I wasn't breathing. I was conscious for the most part, I just kept forgetting to breathe. Doctors had to keep nudging me so I wouldn't sleep. I just remember being pissed at this loud beeping that kept me from enjoying a nice slumber. The doctor had to step out for a second, and my grandmother assured him she could look after me for a second. Unfortunately for her, she was out of her mind with rage at my foster parents. She didn't hold anything back. My grandma is a sweet Mormon Uten without a rude bone in her body. Well, I heard quite a few FUs, pieces of crap, etc. My point is she didn't notice I had passed out until the monitor signaled I had flatlined. This is the bit where I died, and is by far the most vivid part of the experience. I remember being capable of thought, but no thoughts were in my head. I can only describe it as being conscious of my spirit, but without a body for my thoughts to be processed in. I just kind of existed without feeling, thinking, or being anything. I was floating. Honestly, at the time, it was a great feeling. I don't remember any visions of people, family, places, or anything like that. But I felt something wrap around me and comfort me. Without talking, I was assured I was okay, that there was nothing to be worried about, and at that point my thoughts returned. I knew at that moment, without knowing how long I'd be able to keep thinking, that I had to go back. I didn't want to, but knowing that the last thing I'd see before I left mortal life was these 2 pieces of human trash who had abused me, neglected me, and treated me like a stain that they didn't want to bother trying to clean up, that did it. I wanted to get back to my body, fix my life so I could go back and live with my biological parents and feel loved again. In that moment, that's all I cared about. And then I sort of willed myself back. Doctors had tried to resuscitate me, but had failed. Everyone was shocked when I opened my eyes, and seeing the tears in my grandma's eyes after thinking she'd lost me, that did it. I fixed my life, I reinvented myself, and threw out all my anger, depression, rage, and everything else that put me in Brent and Karen's home. Honestly, the only anger I felt, the burning hatred kind that makes you want to do anything possible to release it, in the last 5-ish years since I moved from their home, is when I think about them and how they're still fostering youth in custody and probably pulling the same shit with those kids. I live about an hour away from where they are now, and I have to restrain myself from driving up there, kidnapping those kids, and taking them to the authorities with an explanation of why. The only reason I haven't done that is because I've tried telling the authorities what kind of people they are. I guess the words of a juvenile F up don't stack up against the lies from people who have practiced this stuff for years. Story 10. I was electrocuted by about 13,800 volts. The doctors say it's likely the first hit stopped my heart and the second one started it, before I was pulled like a lifeless corpse to safety. I remember experiencing the darkest dark and the most silent silence. I ceased to care that I was dying. Time seemed to change. It could have been hours, it seemed. It was only about 30 seconds. I felt as though I was floating and floated towards something that I eventually realized was my body and reality. Upon joining with whatever it was I was floating towards, I became self-aware in my body and heard the electricity making horrible noises and knew I was in danger. From there, it was a horribly painful experience where I lost most of my toes due to tissue death and had severe electrical burns on all 4 limbs. More surgeries than I care to count, and seeing the round bone ends of my toes that were freshly amputated still haunts me a little. Was in the hospital for about a month inpatient, and then for 10 months, daily as an outpatient. Basically sent me home for my mental sanity but needed daily attention. I got addicted to painkillers, had to learn to walk again, and had to see a pain management therapist. It was horrible at times, but eventually the pain began to subside. I went back to school and became an engineer, and I don't think I'd be where I am without this thing happening. Really strange to think that I am in some way grateful now. Also, I can't watch horror anymore. Hollywood actually does a very realistic job. Story 11. I don't know if this counts, as I don't think I flatlined, but I had a huge postpartum hemorrhage after my second and last child was born. I lost 2.3 ltrs of blood, which I think is about half of all my blood, and considered the highest classification of blood loss before death occurs. I was given general anesthetic before I passed out on my own, but leading up to that was such a surreal experience. As someone has previously mentioned, there is this sense of acceptance, of laying back and going with it. When I first started bleeding, I was scared and panicking. By the time I was being wheeled into theater, I was smiling at the midwife and telling her it was going to be okay. I was delirious and euphoric and not scared at all. My vision started to go. At first it was colored spots, then everything had a gray hue, as tunnel vision set in. Sound became muffled, like putting my hands over my ears. The whole time, the general feeling of indifference and no urge to fight it was there. It was so calm I don't think I've ever computed just how lucky I am to be here. So a near-death experience by blood loss can confirm, not bad. The recovery though, I felt like shit for fucking weeks and had PTSD. I was so physically weak that I could barely take care of the baby and had to inject myself with anti-clotting meds for 6 weeks every day. Story 12. I was dead for a very short period of time, like 30 seconds to a minute. There's a big misconception about it. It's not like sleeping at all. I'll try to explain. There's always a sort of white noise in the back of my mind. It quiets down when I sleep, but it's still there. I never noticed it before I died, but I do now. I don't want to romanticize death, but when I was out, it was like this perfect nothingness. And nothingness is so hard to imagine normally, but once you experience it, and they bring you back, part of you wishes you could have stayed. There's no positive feelings there, obviously, but it takes away everything bad too. All your stress, the nightmares, the troubles, all gone. Just nothing exists. It's beautiful in a way. I'm not suicidal at all, and hope to live the rest of a long and happy life. But I'm very much looking forward to a lack of consciousness when I do eventually pass again, and I can honestly say I don't fear death anymore. Story 13. When I was 15, I was scheduled to do a tilt table test. They lean you up at an angle on a table, because I was consistently experiencing dizziness and fainting spells. After about 20 minutes, the doctor tilted the table back, and I could feel myself passing out. I got severe tunnel vision and lost like 95% of my eyesight, like looking through a straw, and then I blacked out. I remember hearing the DR call the code, and my father cussing at the DR that he killed me. I remember hearing a lot of slamming and banging around, which I assumed was the crash cart and nurses shoving into this small testing room. I felt a pressure on my chest, like when you have someone stand on your back to crack it, which I found out later was the nurses doing CPR. I saw an array of vivid colors kind of dancing around forming objects in the dark. The scariest thing was how peaceful it felt, just pure 100% peace. No panic, no pain, no sadness, nothing, just bliss. I coded for just under 2 minutes, and as soon as I came to and opened my eyes, I felt seriously angry and hostile. I started ripping off whatever I could get my hands on and yelling at the DR to get me off the table. Story 14. One of my old frat brothers was clinically dead for like 40 seconds because of Xanax. He said that he saw himself floating above his body in the hospital room. He said that he could see doctors and nurses working on him and family in the room. He said he slowly floated above the hospital and towards a light. He said the most peaceful feeling he has ever experienced washed over him. This is a person who has done MDMA and coke in college. He said it's almost impossible to describe the feeling with our vocabulary. He said it feels like a weight was lifted off you. He said he saw some long-gone family in the light, but they told him it wasn't his time. He said he was angry because he felt so good but floated back down to his body. I have no idea if he is telling the truth, but he is a trustworthy friend. He never used drugs again. Story 15. I was 6 to 7 years old, and one day I got rushed to the hospital by my parents because they heard me breathing really loud and hard. The last thing I remembered were faces of the doctors and nurses above me while I was lying on my back. Then I flatlined. The weirdest, unexplainable thing happened then and there. I suddenly could see the whole scene as a spectator, like I was a floating spirit in that room. I could see myself getting revived, saw my mom crying and my dad comforting her. Then I saw a white entity shaped like my body, falling through the ceiling and slowly, like a leaf on the wind, falling down to eventually land inside my body. That's when that experience ended. I was put in a medically induced coma, and I woke up after some days, I don't remember. I had stuff plugged into me and 4 red glowing elastic ring on my finger, etc. Anyway, I later mentioned to the doctors that I saw it all. I saw them using the defibrillators, my parents, etc. No one really believed me and told me that I was probably dreaming and biasing my memories due to watching TV. But I know what I saw. I need to clear some confusion. I don't really recall what was the exact cause of my hospitalization, but I know that it started with an asthma attack alongside with a heart failure. My memories from that time are a mess, and I spent a lot of time in hospitals, and I've taken heart meds and steroids till I was in my mid-teens. Wish I knew/remembered more, but I never really had it explained to me. I just went along with the doctors, my parents, and medicines. As for the defibrillators part some of you mentioned, I'm really confused right now. I could have sworn that I saw them preparing the defibrillators just after they did CPR on me for some time. Maybe they used them after I got my pulse back. Sorry if it all sounds like a mess. Maybe I was actually just hallucinating like some of you imply. I just recalled one thing. I remember that while I was in the spectator mode, I saw a nurse handing a paper to my mom for her to sign. I later asked her what did she sign that night, and she was like, "How do you know I signed anything? You were unconscious." It turned out it was some insurance stuff. Also, I have a heart defect since birth. I don't know the exact name, but it has to do with something in my heart not opening/closing properly, which caused me insane stabbing pains in heart area once in a while. They're gone now, so I'm off meds. Story 16. Not necessarily clinically dead, but I was pronounced dead 2 times in the same night after a car accident I was in when I was 16. My great-grandma pulled me out of the car, and we walked through this really peaceful field of flowers. When I woke up 2 weeks later, she was sitting on the edge of my bed and told me to tell my mom that everything was going to be okay. My great-grandma died when I was 10, and before that she had been bedridden after a stroke. I never saw her walk or heard her talk in my entire life. It was amazing and beautiful. Story 17. I don't share it much, but I've had 4 heart surgeries, and in my first and third one I coded. You had to be conscious for these surgeries to get your heart to react appropriately. The first time it was just nothingness. Black. Just nothing. I can't even explain how long it felt like nothingness. And then I remember waking up with them over me saying, "We lost you for a second there. Are you okay?" The second time is the hard one to share. I woke up in a type of subway feeling thing, but everything was white. The subway, the tunnel walls we were speeding through. I didn't have a body per se. It felt like I was the subway at times, and at times it was like I was just looking out a window at the tunnel wall. It came to a stop, and it was just black nothingness again. And then I heard a voice of a much older man. He said, "Are you ready to go?" And I just had nothing. Like I didn't know how to speak. "We're going now if you're ready." And something inside me felt so ready to go. Like I was a magnet to it. This unknown destination in the black nothingness ahead. I remember finally saying, "Oh, okay." He said another time with a slightly different tone, We'll be leaving here. You are ready to go." And finally something in me snapped, and I remembered I had a life and people I'd leave behind. And my first thought was, I can't leave my girlfriend. I couldn't do that. And my mom and dad. My puppies. I can't leave any of them. My family, my friends. And I made a decision I couldn't leave. I didn't even have to say it. Once I decided I couldn't leave, and I was for sure staying, I woke up and came to consciousness with the medical team all around me. Story 18. This is my mother's story. I was privileged to be there when she talked to her doctor the next day and to witness his reaction. She had been afraid to die. After this experience, she was no longer afraid and started enjoying life more, seizing the day, if you will. My mother was in the hospital being treated for a reaction to arthritis medication. This was more than 30 years ago, so procedures have changed. She was in a bed far from the nurse's station because she was stable and in no danger. For some reason her heart stopped. They never found out why. The nurse found her without a pulse and called a code. My mother, meanwhile, had left her body and was floating up by the ceiling. She said she felt no fear, only wonder at what was happening and pity for the poor body laying on the bed because it was so sick and damaged. She had a lot wrong with her. As the team was working on her without success, and the attending physician went down the hall to the nurse's desk. My mom was curious about what he was going to say, so she followed him and listened to him. He was upset and basically saying he had no idea why her heart stopped, why it wasn't starting again, and to call her personal doctor. He returned to her room, and she followed him back. They were working away, and she said she found that she had no feeling of fear or regret. She's been physically disabled for some time, and was enjoying the freedom of movement and lack of pain. She said she saw the light, but wasn't hugely bright and more a feeling of peace and safety, and she felt that her parents were near, but, mom being mom, was more interested in what was happening to her and her body. I mean, if you are dead, it would be good to know why. The attending physician finally did something that worked to start her heart, and she said she was sucked back in. She was really pissed off because she knew she was about to start a wonderful adventure and the doctor spoiled it. She said she didn't want to be in that fat handicapped body. She struggled to get back out, but was held back, and then the drugs they gave her worked, and she became unconscious. My sister and I were sitting with her the next day. She was in a lot of pain from them pounding on her chest, and pretty ticked off that she didn't get to go on her adventure. Hobbit jokes were ensuing when the attending physician came in to check on her. She asked him why they didn't know what happened and why she died. He didn't know what to say. She told him she'd left her body and had seen what happened. He patronized her and started to tell her about hallucinating and her brain being deprived of oxygen. She shut him off and demanded to know how she could have known what he said at the nurse's station at the end of the hall if she hadn't been there. She proceeded to repeat his conversation with the nurse. The doctor looked like he'd seen a ghost. His face went white, and he spun on his heel and bolted for the door. He actually bounced off both sides of the door before he was able to get out. That's how fast he was going. She said later that she never saw him again. My mother was never religious and didn't start now. Instead, she became more spiritual, something she had previously had no interest in. She just felt more at peace with herself and her condition and started to pay more attention to the little things that people ignore in their rush, like sunsets and butterflies. She was buying all kinds of things, typical of people who don't want to admit that they are very ill. It's a way of staying connected with life. She stopped this behavior and said she didn't need things where she was going. This was always said with a smile. She asked that I share her story so that people know that there really is something after death. It's interesting and not at all scary. It has nothing to do with religion. What happens afterwards just seemed to be a fact like gravity is. She said she was surprised that she wasn't surprised. She died for real about a year later, and I'm sure since she had an inquisitive mind that she's enjoying herself. On a slightly different note, I've had several dogs who returned after they passed. The only ones who came back had huge personalities and felt real ownership of the house. The best story is about Joe, a little black dachshund/beagle who ruled the house for 10 years. The night after she passed, my ex heard her at the door. There was no mistaking her scratch and bark. I heard her too, as did the other dogs. He didn't believe in ghosts but opened the door and called to her. Honey, our Doberman, was lounging in Joe's chair, and she got out of like she was shot. The other two dogs milled around, as if they were greeting someone. I couldn't see her, but I talked to her as if she was there and explained what had happened and that she was to go on over the Rainbow Bridge. I'd join her when I could. The next morning when I came downstairs, Honey was in Joe's chair and made it clear that it was now hers. I think Joe gave it to her. She always was a beneficent queen.